authors and conversation panel featuring the 2022 Minnesota Book Award finalists in the competitive category of middle grade literature. The Minnesota Book Awards is a program of the Friends of the St. Paul Public Library in the organization's capacity as the Minnesota Center for the Book. This year's book awards are sponsored by Education Minnesota. The middle grade literature category is also specially sponsored through the generosity of Education Minnesota. My name is Anika Fajardo, and this is my third year in a row doing a Meet the Finalists panel. My first book, Magical Realism for Non-Believers, a memoir of finding family, was a Minnesota Book Award finalist in the memoir category in 2020, and my debut middle grade novel, What If a Fish, was last year's Book Award winner in that category. So I know how exciting it is to be a finalist. As we get started, we would like to take a moment to acknowledge the Dakota people, Indigenous keepers of the land on which most of us in this panel recording are zooming in from today. This land was reserved for the Dakota in the Treaty of Traverse des Sioux, signed with the United States in 1851, and it remains sacred to them today. We also acknowledge the Ojibwe people, fellow Indigenous inhabitants of this land. The Dakota and Ojibwe people are the original stewards of story in this place now called Minnesota. The Friends of the St. Paul Public Library, organizers of the Minnesota Book Awards, honor this tradition and the knowledge and values embedded in it as we all work together to lift up storytellers in our state. For this latest installment of the Minnesota Book Awards popular Meet the Finalists series, I'm pleased to be joined by Nina Hamza, author of Ahmed Aziz's Epic Year, published by Quill Books, HarperCollins. Don Quigley, author of Jojo Makoons, The Used-to-Be Best Friend, illustrated by Tara Audibert and published by Heartdrum, HarperCollins. Ursu, author of The Troubled Girls of Dragomir Academy, published by Walden Press, HarperCollins. Jacqueline West, author of Long Lost, published by Greenwillow Books, HarperCollins. Congratulations to each of you. In the interest of making the most of our short time together, I'm going to begin with a round robin question that I'd like each of you to respond to in turn. I'll then have a specific question for each of you and your wonderful finalist books. So for all authors, all of your books have to do with family in some way and how children navigate their roles in their families. How do each of your characters' families impact them and their stories? And let's start with Nina.
Hi. So I'm going to generalize in a big way and say that generally Indian families, they are big, they are loud, they are in your business, they are lovely, but they can also be a bit much. And I hope my mom never hears this interview. And the fact that I even worry about my mom hearing this interview gives you a little insight to what an Indian family is. And within that whole big, nosy, lovely Indian family, the oldest son is almost a trope. And it's like they are responsible, they are mature, they put their family before they put themselves. And I've always said that the main character, Ahmed, is based off my son. I got to say something nice about my son, because the last time I spoke about him, I called him a supreme underachiever, and he calls me out on it. So he is that, oldest son trope. And Ahmed is, in the book, he's the oldest son, which means no matter what he's going through a move from Hawaii, he's going through dealing with bullies, with his father's illness. He kind of deals with it on his own. He doesn't bring it up to his family. I'm not saying this is a great thing, but this is how it is. And even when his younger sister deals with issues, they have the older brother, annoying little sister kind of relationship, but then he's also the mature older brother who helps his sister when she needs it. So I think if anything, the family decides how he's going to do by his role in the family, which is almost kind of suck it up and do what you need to, which is what he does to take care of his issues.
I love that. And I hope your son is not insulted.
I hope I've, brought it back.
Yeah. Dawn, how about you and your book?
I love this question. So I would say for my book, Jojo Makoons, because she's an Ojibwe girl, it is very, very common to have extended family living together. And so Jojo lives with her grandma, her Cookum, after grandpa passed away. And so that absolutely is key to Jojo Makoon's story. But also it's the native humor it shows in definitely the relationship between with all the native elders and JoJo. And then a little spin on elder is that we always revere our native elders. But JoJo Makoons is a little different because she seems to think that in her own little quirky way, how she interprets the world, that she is very wise. And so, and then also in addition to the people in the family, her cat Mimi is also a part of the family too. And so she really navigates, that's what she calls her first best friend number one. And then I would say lastly, naming is a big aspect too of Native culture. And so JoJo's middle name is Makoons, and that's Ojibwe for bear cub, for little bear cub, because her grandpa gave her her middle name because when she was little, she had little stalks of black hair that looked like little bear cub hair. And then she also kind of growled. So it's really just this beautiful mishmash of native elders, humor, and really community. And it's not just the family that we might think of a traditional family of 3 or 4 people in mainstream. So yeah, definitely love that question. Thank you.
I really like that the cat is included in the family. You know, all of us with our pets, we all like to believe that they are true family members. Anne, how about you?
Hi, I just want to say I thought the scene with Mimi and the teepee was the funniest thing I've read in like forever. So I'm a big Mimi fan and a big JoJo fan. So my book takes place in a fictional world in the kingdom of Illyria, but I would say the family issues are resonant with what everyone else is talking about. For Maria, she's her older brother is destined to be a sorcerer, and when you are a sorcerer in Illyria, you are destined to get an estate and a title, and your whole family moves. So for Maria's parents, this is like everything. So their entire family is all about like making sure that Luca gets to be a sorcerer, and as for Maria, that she represents the family well, that she is a lady, that she knows how to be a girl and a woman in this very patriarchal society. So for Maria, she always feels like she doesn't quite fit. The pressures from her family, the fact that it's all about her brother, that she and her brother don't get along at all because he thinks that she's messing with him. She thinks he's the worst, which she kind of is at the beginning, makes her feel like she's just doesn't fit in society and doesn't have a place, and that sort of translates to that there's something wrong with her. Where this ends up evolving is realizing that maybe there are messages coming down from society in general that are influencing her family, influencing her relationship with her brother, and the way she sees herself, which I hope is resonant for kids in their contemporary world and how they feel about themselves.
I love the way that families and relationships are the same, whether they're in a real world or in a fictional world. How about you, Jacqueline, with your book and your family?
Sure. So the family in my book has just moved from their longtime hometown to this tiny, very insular New England town in order for the older sister in the family to be closer to her figure skating coach. She's a future Olympian. She hopes her whole life is competitive figure skating. So her younger sister, Fiona, who's the protagonist, is being hauled along from everything she knows and loves to this, very unwelcoming, tiny place. And I wanted to portray, especially now that I'm a parent myself, like a family that genuinely loves each other and is trying to do what is best for the majority, and yet is still kind of failing each other in these infinite small ways, sometimes larger, but also small ways, where, the parents are genuinely trying to do what means that they'll spend the most time together and everybody gets a little bit of something they need. But of course, somebody's going to feel like they're getting the short end of the stick, and that's Fiona, my main character. And there are actually 2 sister stories within the book. There's Fiona in the present day with her older sister Arden, and then there's the book within the book, a book that she finds at the local library and reads, which is about another pair of sisters that lived in a very similar small town a century ago, and the way that these 2 sister stories kind of parallel or echo each other. because I think those sibling bonds especially can be so tight and so tangled. And, you know, the people we love the most can also easily hurt us the most, which is why we all write about families. I suppose we've got like millennia worth of material. But yeah, that's what I wanted to focus on, this sibling bond and the sister bond, where there is love, but there's also the potential for so much potential hurt and betrayal.
Families make really good material, especially for conflict. Thank you. I'd like to ask some questions specifically for each of you. And I think I'll start with Dawn. Providing Native kids with a mirror and exposing non-Native readers to Native culture could be handled in many ways. Can you talk about how JoJo became to be this wonderful, very funny conduit for that?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I'm in my 26th year of being an educator. I'm in higher ed right now, and I absolutely love Dr. Sims Bishop's idea of the windows, mirrors, sliding glass doors. And so, you know, when I was growing up, I did not see myself in books. I loved reading. I mean, most authors were just voracious readers, and I remember even just like, you know, eating my cereal, reading the back of the, you know, reading the ingredients in the cereal box, or just anything I could get my hands on. But I didn't see Native joy in books. It's really important that we all read Native American history, language, and culture, especially in the state that we're in. And so, but again, as an educator, I only saw books, and I love teachers. We don't have big budgets. And so a lot of times we just had to use whatever in the kind of the dusty old book room. But what I did notice is that a lot of the books used, I think it's getting better, but are all about loss. Loss of land, loss of children through Native American boarding schools, loss of clean water through sand fracking and the oil pipes, sadly lost of health through chemical dependency. And so one of the things that it's important to understand that, but for me, I wanted to write Native joy. I wanted to write something that, you know, it's been so hard for COVID for everybody, but especially for children. And I just wanted them to, I wanted to write a great book and to bring them some joy. But also, I also kind of wanted to, I didn't want to have this be a teaching book. So in other words, I did not want to have this book be like I'm teaching culture. I just wanted to write a great story. Oh, and by the way, the main character happens to be Native. And then I'll just add one more kind of anecdote to that. So I always say that Jojo Makoons was born from rejection. So I had a picture book that I submitted to my agent, and of course, you know, it was lovely. No, it really wasn't. I look back now, and it got some rejections. And so my dear friend and mentor, Cynthia Leidig Smith, she said, Dawn, have you ever thought about writing a chapter book? Because there's never been a Native main character in a chapter book series. And I said, well, I can't write a chapter book. I don't know how. And then I was like, can I? And then pretty soon JoJo just started walking around in my mind, making me laugh. You know, we have two kids, but I also taught kindergarten, first and second grade for a while. And I love the way they see the world. And so I just thought, you know what, I'm going to put JoJo, I'm going to make her the star. And so all the other adults are just trying to kind of scratching their head, and they're not quite understanding the world like JoJo does. And so I think the mirror is to see contemporary Native characters, because I always say, you know, Native people, we're still here. You know, we go to Target and come out with way too much stuff. So that's one of the things that I really, that was really my motivation, is so Native kids could see themselves, but then also non-Native kids could see that they do the same things as Native kids. They play outside. They kind of question their teachers, if their teachers really know what they're doing. So that was definitely my ode to Dr. Radine Sims Bishops and her mirrors.
I knew that was going to be an interesting answer, and you did not disappoint. And I love the idea of, like, I was just imagining, I bet JoJo was just like walking around in your head a lot.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Thank you, Dawn. Let me go to Jacqueline. As a former librarian, I loved seeing your dedication. So how does the library in Long Lost reflect something about your own experience with libraries or with librarians?
Oh yeah, the book is definitely a love letter to libraries and librarians, like yeah, unabashedly so. Uh, and I think it's because to me, libraries have also always meant like refuge and adventure simultaneously, and it's just the best combination. So at any point in my life where I've been, new in a place, especially if I'm kind of lonely and ungrounded, the library is often one of the first places that I go and explore. And it's like this double layer of treasure trove where you're discovering the layout of the library itself, where are the good reading nooks and what's shelved where, but you're also finding the kind of stories within that collection and then escaping into those books. So yeah, that's definitely what happens to my character. There's the library, which is its own little beautiful world, and then there's the story within the library. And yeah, that was all just as a bookworm, such a pleasure to write. But of course, the library that exists in Long Lost, the library is a mansion that has been donated to this small town by this wealthy family. Now they're all dead and they left the home to the town to be the library. That's purely made up. Like, I wish it existed. It's basically my fantasy library. And I know there are some libraries, even some in the Midwest, that are this type of library. There were mansions donated to a community. So I was partway through writing this book, and I was chatting with a librarian. Librarians always have the answers. And she said, "Oh, have you been to Portage? That's where I grew up. Have you been to the Zona Gale Library?" So then I had to look this up. And Zona Gale is this now kind of forgotten playwright who like won a Pulitzer Prize, was one of the first women playwrights to ever do so. And she donated her gorgeous brick mansion to the town of Portage when she died, and it became their local library. And the pictures are just stunning, although they outgrew it apparently in the 90s and built a much more, functional, modern, soulless place. but the old library is still there, and I'd love to visit it. And I love that that kind of thing does actually exist in the real world. So yes, library love.
I love how the fictional and the real intersect and inspire. Thank you. Let's see. How about Anne? Oh, talk about books. I was so excited to see that your book has a map. I'm obsessed with maps and especially books and maps. I mean, but maps and books. Can you talk about the world building you did to create Illyria? And particularly, I was very interested in how you named everything.
I think that's definitely a bookworm quality. In addition to loving libraries, we all, go to maps and books. We're like, oh, this is so cool. And the first secondary world fantasy I wrote, I was like, oh my God, I get a map. So here's the map. The artist is James Fernhaber, and the country is Illyria, as I said earlier. And as someone who spends a lot of time both in books and my head, I don't have any idea how the world works. And I don't understand science or geography or anything. So when I had to do my first high fantasy, The Real Boy, I realized I had to create a whole world and it had to make sense. So, and I was not feeling I'd be very good at that. So I came up with an analog, which was that it would be set in the Eastern Mediterranean in the year 1675. So that meant that was the climate and that was the technology. So I had something concrete that I could look at. I still made basic geography errors, like apparently you need a mountain for a river. I didn't know that, but that's why we have editors. So for this one, when I was sitting down to do it, I was trying to come up with an analog, and and my head goes to Western Europe at first because that's sort of where so much fantasy is set. But I am Eastern European. My last name is Romanian, and I suddenly realized, why am I defaulting to this thing we've seen 100 times before? Why not do Romania and really delve into that sort of culture and world? So this world is supposed to feel Eastern European. Illyria is, I think, what is now Albania, but was a country in ancient Eastern Europe. And so the names kind of came from there. Some of them have Romanian words in them. The neighboring countries, one is Ilvania, one is Muntland, which is mountain land, but there's also the southern country is Kel. It used to have another vaguely Eastern European name, but I was watching the Hallmark Christmas movies and I realized it sounded like a fake country in all the Hallmark Christmas movies, like Belgravia or something. So I changed it to something that sounded completely different. And it's a country that's ruled by a witch queen. It's matriarchal. And I'm like, oh, I'll name it after Kelly Barnhill. So it is Kel after Kelly Barnhill, Minnesota Book Award finalist and fantasist who isn't herself a witch queen. So those are the names. They're from Eastern Europe and also Minnesota children's writers.
That is so wonderful. I love that it's actually based. I love that you used an actual language to base the names because they seem so realistic. That's really neat. And Nina. So Ahmed is dealing with a sick parent, which many young readers unfortunately are dealing with as COVID has impacted so many families. Can you talk about the experience of having a plot centered on illness while navigating the pandemic, both as a person and as an author with a book release?
This question, first of all, I've never been asked this question. And there was a professor of mine who said, if you are asked a question and you don't know the answer, you start by saying, that's a really good question. All right, so I'm going to say that's a really great question. All right, because I never thought of my book as surrounding illness, but then, it is, honestly. And they always say, write what you know about. And I'm actually a physician, an internal medicine doctor. I didn't realize illness was such a big part of it. I guess illness is just part of my life. But beyond that, I really don't think there are any parallels between the pandemic and the book. And I think that's why it's a great question, because, traditionally, illnesses that are not global pandemics, illness is a time where people come together. Your family comes together, your friends come together, your community comes together. And I think one of the hardest things about this pandemic, beyond the tragedy of the whole thing, was also the, social isolation of it. We're not meant to be separate like that. I have a colleague who says that there's a reason why even in jail, solitary confinement is the biggest punishment you can have, because I'm a supreme introvert and I still recognize the importance of, needing those people. So I don't see a parallel except for the fact of showing us how different it is from normal illnesses. The pandemic was, you were not able to be there. I have so many family members of patients who they could not even be with their family member as they were passing. And that's a tragedy all on its own. And at least with Ahmed's story, it did bring people together. It brought, his family together closer, his friends, it did bring people closer together. And I hope we go back to a time where at least we can be together during illness and not having to be separate.
And Nina, has your experience with your book been impacted by the pandemic?
My experience with my book?
With it coming out?
This is my first book. So I had no expectations of, how it was going to be. I had no knowledge of how it's going to be. Some parts of it was a little relief, like the idea of having a big launch party was a nightmare to me. So when they reached out and said, are you having a launch party? I was like, the pandemic. And so it was actually just a relief that I didn't have to do a lot of those things. So maybe my second book will be different and I'll be able to see I hope I'll be able to see what a more realistic, book coming out would be. But no, I didn't have any expectations, so I was not disappointed.
Let me go back to Dawn, because this is a chapter book. There's more than one book in this series. And I would love to know about, if you could tell us anything about the next JoJo book.
Yeah, so, well, for one thing, I'm so honored to be here with everybody. I say, JoJo's a chapter book, so she's sort of like a little kid and she gets to hang out with the big kids. And so she's very happy to be here with everybody. Yeah, so the series was, I wrote it. I think a lot of authors we're dreamers, right? And so we want to in our little basement by ourselves. We we type and write. But I had this idea that this would be a chapter book series, and so I had to include a lot of characters. Because I wanted to have room to play. And so, and then her home life, her school life. And then, so the second book is Jojo Makoons Fancy Pants. And so she is invited to a wedding. And so traditionally my reservation, the Trail Mountain Reservation in North Dakota, it's formal invitations may not go out. There might be an ad that goes in the local newspaper, very small town, and saying so-and-so is getting married. All are welcome. And then guests will a lot of times just kind of help with the food and things like that. But JoJo got a very beautiful, sparkly, glittery invitation to attend her Auntie Anne's wedding in a very far remote place, Wisconsin. And so it's all about how do you be fancy? And so as JoJo interprets the world, she kind of watches around. She notices like when you put your pinky up when you're drinking, that's very fancy. She also really like a big thing for Native women, or I don't want to generalize, but like beaded jewelry and turquoise, like that is our bling. And so JoJo realizes that, but she doesn't have any. And so like JoJo interprets the world, she was watching somebody eat a banana and she said, ah, and so she's going to take the banana stickers and those are going to be her earring bling. So it's all about navigating a little road trip and how to be fancy.
I love that pretend world that little kids are in. Let's see, Jacqueline. So Fiona feels neglected in the shadow of her older sister, Arden. So my question, was that a dynamic based on your own experience? And you kind of alluded to perhaps having a personal experience with that.
Sorry, I'm still just thinking about the banana stickers as earrings. It's so darling. Actually, no, it's not my own experience. I don't have a sister. I am the big sister in my family, so maybe this is my brother's experience. They'll have to write their own novel and show me sometime. But no, the central relationships, the sister relationships, yeah, I did not grow up that way. As a kid, I remember wishing that I had a sister sometimes, you know, especially when you're in like that Sweet Valley Twins phase and you think, oh, I just want someone who's exactly like me. But that's, of course, never what a sibling relationship is anyway. And that's really what this book explores, is like a pair of girls who could be each other's best friend, but who also, you know, can hurt each other in all these complicated ways. So this is definitely, yes, stolen from other lives that I've observed, other families, other people I know. And yeah, like I said, a little bit of my own being a parent now is woven in there as well. But yeah, no, the sister thing is fiction.
There's a lot of dependence on imagination and fiction. That's just all there is to it. Thank you, Jacqueline. Let me see. Let's go to Nina. I love the way Ahmed interacted with his assigned books. Many writers, as we have already said, have been great readers as kids. And I'm wondering if you are a reluctant reader or an avid reader. And can you talk a little bit about your relationship with books, both maybe when you're a kid or maybe now also?
Sure. I was a very avid reader as a child. A lot of Judy Blume and Beverly Cleary. And because as Indians, we have that connection with British writers as well. Enid Blyton, still don't know how to pronounce if it's Enid, Enid, there's a question out there. So I was a very big reader. Then as I went off to high school and college, I would say I became less of a reader. I do remember summers where I'd go to the library, and I grew up in Saudi Arabia. So we'd go to the library and there'd be that whole long section with just Agatha Christie books in different colors with the crackly library cover on it. I remember going through all of those, but then never looking at a mystery again. So there have been various phases of reading. Right now, I'm a very slow reader. It's like people are going through like 6 books and I'm like, I'm still on chapter 6. I don't know if I'm doing the voices in my head or what's slowing me down. But so I'm a slow reader, but I am reading all the time. My kids are not readers at all. And it really, really pains me. I've tried, I think that's how I became a writer, is I tried reading with them to try to get them to get into it, and they just did not get into it. So my kids are not, but I do think, like, as an adult now, when I read middle grade books, I don't think I ever knew that I missed seeing people like me in my books. I was very happy reading Judy, Ramona and Beezus and all that. And you can always identify with the characters no matter what their skin color is. But once I started reading books that had people of color, it really clicked. Like, I recently read Red, White, and Whole, which was a Newbery honor, and it has an Indian girl who grew up here in the 80s. And I was just like, oh my gosh, so many of my experiences, there they are. So although I do say that all stories are the same in that we all have the same emotions, I do think there's also something to be said about having diverse characters and being able to see ourselves in those characters. And I feel like middle grade books, you can't go wrong. There's so many good things to read. And sometimes I'll read an adult book in between. I'm like, not as good as middle grade.
Yay for middle grade.
Yes.
And Anne, so some people might say, speaking of middle grade, that middle grade audiences are too young for social issues like feminism, which you look at in that book. And I'm wondering if you chose to write on this theme through a fantasy lens because of that.
No. So first of all, yes, middle grade books are the best. And this is our little secret. And I love like the middle grade club because we like know how amazing these books are. And so many adults have no idea. So we just get to be like, to read these books and be happy and love them and share them with kids. I do think, there's a segment of adults that will sort of limit what is appropriate for kids. And you can't listen to those as a writer. They're not really in touch with what kids' lives are. I write in fantasy because that's the language I speak in terms of stories. That's how I think. This book came about though, because was me processing the Brett Kavanaugh hearings, and I could not write anything until I found some way to sort of figure out what I wanted to say about those to kids living today. And if you think about, social issues affect everybody. They affect kids from the time that they're babies. And we're seeing right now all these horrible book bannings that are affecting kids of color and queer kids. And, one of the things that fantasy can do is really talk about power and power relations and like take a step back and look at society as a whole. So whether it is whatever kind of oppression there is, fantasy gives kids a tool to sort of look at that, to understand it, and then maybe sort of take those tools and fight whatever's happening in their lives, which is my hope, I think, for this book and for all books, that it somehow gives kids a little bit of power and confidence and listening to sort of the stories around them and asking, where does the story come from? Who does it serve? And what can I do to tell stories of my own?
I love that, Anne. That's so great. So I'd like to go around and ask you all to respond to this question, that looking at all of your books, they all, and many middle grade books in general, the protagonists are dealing with some type of change that they're not too excited about. I mean, obviously change has to be the instigator of a story, but a lot of these characters are particularly averse to the changes that are happening to them. Can you talk a little bit about how your characters handle their fear of change, and any thoughts on why you think this resonates with young readers so much? Can I go back to you, Anne? We'll start with you.
Yeah, I mean, this is sort of part of what this literature does, right? Is it's taking kids at this moment of great change. I mean, 8 to 12, you are basically going from a little kid to a teenager, and the whole world is changing around you. And you're going from a place where, not universally, but in general, people are protective of you to just, okay, here's the world, deal with it. And I think this is what these books do so well, is help kids with that difficult process of growing up. So, I think that is a theme generally across middle grade is change and the resistance to change and getting the emotional tools to dealing with it. And that's just something that these books can really do well.
Dawn, I know your character is a little bit younger, but she's still really unhappy with the changes in her life.
Yeah, definitely. And this one was really based on friendship. One of the things when I taught in K-12 is we get the fabulous job of rotating lunch duty and supervision. And one of the most painful things was to see a child sitting alone day after day after day. Sometimes they would bring a book and it was their choice, but a lot of times with new students. And so I just wanted to write about this, this universal aspect of feeling like you're out on the outside of a friendship group, or that you don't have friends. And so that's one of the things, even like as an adult, I will go into a conference, scary introvert people like me, and then you're like, oh no, where do I sit for lunch? So it's this aspect of just trying to find where you belong. And so that was definitely something that JoJo kind of changes her understanding of what it means to be a friend and how she can be friendly. So if you ever see me like looking around, please like wave me over and say, sit here, Dawn. I will do the same to all of you.
I promise to do that with Dawn and with all of you. Jacqueline, how about you? How does your characters handle change? And you?
Oh, I mean, not well. It's so comforting that we're all nodding about the not sitting alone, because yeah, I think that's a feeling that just never goes away. I still remember so clearly what it felt like to be, a middle grade age kid myself, where you are experiencing all these massive changes in your own life, the change between childhood and adolescence and, elementary school and middle school. And often there are changes in family structure, and there may be changes in where and how you live, and it's all out of your control. And like, as a kind of fearful and anxious kid, which I was, that was just both terrifying and infuriating, that none of that was my call. I was a kid and someone else was making those decisions for me. And I feel like that's often what we are doing when we reflect this in middle school stories. I still feel so much sympathy for any kid undergoing those changes and feeling like they don't have the agency that they want. But where they do is, of course, in how they react and what they learn and, grow out of that change. And so many of my stories begin with a main character in a suddenly new or unfamiliar location, the things that they discover, the people they meet, even though all of that is terrifying to me as an introvert and would have been terrifying to me as a young person. But it also is just a story I never get tired of telling. It's that, continuous like adventure. The world is here for you to find your place in it. Yeah.
Thank you, Jacqueline. And Nina, how about you?
So I have a really terrible memory. I said that wrong. I don't remember things like I should, I guess. So my family always says they can always take me to the airport, Photoshop me in pictures of like Italy and Rome, and France, and say I went, because I will not remember the trip anyway. But I do remember things from that 8 to 12 year age, because I think they hit you so hard. And I think it's because that's the first time you want something different, but you don't always have the power to be able to make that happen. And I think that's why kids like reading these books. And I think they can read it in two ways. One is how we see like superhero movies and think, wow, wouldn't that be awesome? And the second is to think about it in a way like, well, I wonder if I could do this, and use it as inspiration. And when I'm doing school visits, I'll often show this picture of me. I think I must have been in like 7th grade. And it was because, people don't know how to cut curly hair. And so I knew when they were cutting my hair, I knew they were cutting it way too short, but I couldn't get myself to say, I think that's too short. I would just be like, okay. And there's a picture of me. It's basically like, I look at the top of a Q-tip, like there, because I was like, wouldn't it be great if we could just say for ourselves what we want? And I think that's why, that change is where that happens, where we just don't know how to deal with it that way.
Thank you so much. And anyone who hasn't read these books yet is going to be in for such a treat to read each of these finalist books. Thanks to our tremendous middle grade literature finalists and to all of you watching for taking part in this Meet the Finalists panel. If you enjoyed this talk, you can find a treasure trove of past events archived on the YouTube channel of the Minnesota Book Award steward organization, the Friends of the St. Paul Public Library. You can find out more about future programs on their website, thefriends.org. In particular, mark your calendars for Tuesday, April 26th. That's the evening that the winner in this category and 8 others will finally be revealed. For the first time in 2 years, the Minnesota Book Award will be both live and in person. Please join us in St. Paul at the Ordway Center for the Performing Arts. Tickets are just $22, inclusive of processing fees. Visit thefriends.org/MNBA for details. Thanks.